Welcome back to the show. I'm Faraz. I'm with Zach. This is our buy-sell show, but it's week one. Who the heck are we buying? Who are we selling before the games even start? Most people, who drafted their teams aren't parting ways with their players just yet. They drafted those players for a reason. You guys drafted your players for a reason. But there are certain scenarios where they might be willing to part ways with certain guys, and you might be able to take advantage of some players who are ready to explode, and you want to try and grab them before week one. Also, since it's week one, we want to go over some trading tips and tricks to keep in mind through the rest of the season. I actually want to start there before we get into a few buys and sells. Okay, first things first. Look around your league. Look at everyone's roster. Take notes on who's short on running backs, who's short on wide receivers, who has extra depth at those positions, who has depth but maybe not many big names, who punted tight end, who needs a tight end. You happen to have two. And most importantly, take a look at who has starting caliber players on their bench. If you like some of those names, target those guys. It's way easier to pluck a player off someone's bench than off their starting lineup. For example, someone might have went running back heavy. Javonte Williams is on their bench. David Montgomery is on their bench. Brian Robinson's on their bench. You need some depth. You need an RB2 because you went 0 RB, but you didn't end up getting the guy you wanted. Sometimes players on other people's benches can improve your starting lineup, and you can offer them something that they need. And when you want to make a trade, and by the way, when you want to make a trade, actually consider what the other team needs. If you happen to need a running back and you have serious depth at wide receiver, you might want to look for a team who needs a wide receiver. That team is going to be exponentially easier to trade with. You give me a need, I give you a need. It's simple. It doesn't always work that way, but it's a great place to start, right?
Yeah, that's usually where I go as soon as I start thinking about making a trade. I look at what other teams are needing, and then I narrow down who's going to be easiest to trade with. I'm not going to trade with somebody who already has a bunch of wide receivers and offer them another wide receiver because you can only start so many players in a week. And another thing, when you're making these trades, kind of just go off what you said. Don't write off the value of like the throw-ins. You call them throw-ins. These are the guys that kind of just get slapped onto the deal to help push it to the commissioner's desk and they get the review done. But they can feel ancillary, but there's value to be had in every part of the deal. Like going off of that example again, if you have a lot of wide receivers and need some help at running back, the person you're trading with, if they're just swimming in running backs, be deliberate. See if you can land a player with the chance to appreciate in a big way down the stretch. So if you're trading for like Joe Mixon and you're offering a guy like Michael Pittman, target cheap upside players like Jalen McMillan, Demario Douglas, other names, just these add-ins. And you'd be surprised at the value you can poach just by using the big names in the trade as a Trojan horse, so to speak. Just keep taking flyers on players all season long as you make those deals. Keep moving players around. And if it doesn't work out, what's the worst that can happen? You have to drop a player that you essentially got for free as part of another bigger deal. I think that's the way I like to go about adding extra talent, getting those extra flyers on my team, and taking extra chances every single time I make a transaction. Don't write off that value.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm totally with you on that. I love trying to like sneakily get a throw-in, right? Like I'm actually trading for the throw-in almost. You know what I mean? Like I like Dontavian Wicks, for example. Like right now, he's most likely not going to be a centerpiece for a trade, right? But I might go and grab like a legitimate player, right? And then like have Dontavian Wicks as like the throw-in to like make it seem like, I'm just trying to make it as even as possible, right? Because you want my guy, or whatever it is, right? So like, but the fact is like I might be more excited about getting Dontavian Wicks as the throw-in than I was like the actual player who, probably ended up replacing another player that I already had to begin with. Because now you have something exciting on your bench, that could potentially blossom into like a legitimate, fantasy superstar. Oh, well,
Exactly.
Listen. I mean, I know I'm high on Dontavian Wicks, but it is what it is. Sorry.
I think a lot of people are high on Dontavian Wicks. I didn't pick him specifically for that example because there's a lot of people on the Dontavian Wicks hype train right now. So it's like I don't know how many people are just going to be like, "Oh, he's an add-in." I don't think a lot of people are going to treat him as one of those throw-ins. But at the same time, if you can do that, absolutely, make that move. Another tip.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
Another tip that I definitely would caution everybody to just think about, especially after week one. We're starting the season. Don't overreact to week one. The trade block is there. but not to be used willy-nilly. It's not you don't have to make a trade every single week. Don't overreact to week one. We've all been there. You wait all of these weeks, sometimes months after you drafted your team. You're just waiting to see your team play. They come out and your team just lays an egg on the opening weekend. Remember last year in week one, Jamar Chase put up 9 points. Lamar Jackson put up 7. Dak Prescott put up 6. Jamar finished as a top 12 receiver. Lamar and Dak both finished as top 5 quarterbacks. It's not all about week one. It's easy to hit the panic button, but I like to wait at least 2 or 3 weeks, see if things improve. And they usually do, by the way, because the good players will have that game that gets them on track, and then they're right back into the swing of things. The last thing you want to do is overreact to a rough outing week one, have a fire sale on one of your best players, and then turn around, and then 5 weeks later you get beat by the player you traded away earlier in the season. This doesn't mean you straight up ignore glaring issues with the way your player is performing. Obviously, you have to determine whether it's a utilization issue or just a few missed opportunities that are deflating a player's production. But game scripts, they can get ugly in week one. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. And then it's not always reflective of what we should expect for a team over the course of an entire season. I just know Kyren Williams is going to be one of those running backs that people will be looking to just offload if he doesn't have a big game in week one. And that's because there's been all this hoopla about him returning punts. Like, who cares? I'd actually venture as far as recommending you check in with your Kyren Williams managers and see what his price is right now. There's a lot of paranoia about his role this season. If you can get him cheap, he has a chance to pay off in a big way. I guess that's kind of one of my trade targets ahead of week one, don't you think, Faraz? I think that we could get him pretty low right now compared to, I think we have him ranked higher than most in terms of where he is in our rankings going into the season.
Yeah, we do. And I'm expecting a big year. Okay. And by the way, guys, our week one rankings are going up shortly, so make sure to check that out at upperhandfantasy.com. We'll also have trade charts, to help you value players and make deals. You'll have the ability to contact me through text message to answer questions. We have exclusive articles weekly and a lot more. So go check out the website so you can see all the ways that we can help you win that fantasy championship this year. Upperhandfantasy.com. I have another tip, Zach. You don't get points for quarterbacks and tight ends on your bench. I know you want a safety plan. I know you want to be safe. I know you want that depth in case your guys get hurt. I've talked to people, in our homies and diehards tiers, over text message, and, I'm like, hey, why did you draft Goddard here when you already drafted Sam Laporta? And the response is like, oh, because Laporta has a week 5 bye and I need someone to fill in for him. No, don't do that. Okay? First of all, you're going to draft another tight end just for the plan of keeping him on the bench for 4 weeks before you can use him, taking up a valuable bench spot that should be reserved for a potential breakout player or another person's handcuff, not your own, right? And then the opportunity cost, right, of the draft pick that you could have used on a potential breakout player or another person's handcuff, not your own handcuff, but another person's handcuff, because you want to make it, you want a chance to make your team better, to make your team, and not to make your team still okay if your starting running back gets hurt. By the way, if your starting running back gets hurt and you put in a handcuff for that player, your team got worse. It didn't stay the same, and it didn't get better, usually.
You just do damage control. That's it.
Damage control, and that's not how you win championships.
There's still damage, but it's damage control. That's all it is.
Exactly. And that's not how I prefer to build rosters. That's not how you win fantasy championships. Okay. Now, if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, don't keep a backup quarterback or tight end. And if you do, they should be on the higher end, and you should have full intentions of trading those players to get some pieces that will eventually improve your starting lineup. So, one quarterback, one tight end rostered, in one quarterback leagues, non-tight end premium leagues, with a bunch of running backs and wide receivers on your bench, and then you stream when you have to. So if the bye week is coming up, maybe a week before, you look at the matchups or whatever. You look at, okay, you know what? I'm gonna keep this quarterback on my bench for a week. I'm gonna keep this tight end on my bench for a week. And honestly, if you play like me, I'm usually not doing that until the week of. But I like to live dangerously. So yeah.
The biscuit, as a friend of mine always said.
Yes.
But I would only ever stream QBs and tight ends. That's the whole point of stashing, having those running backs and wide receivers on your bench, so you don't have to stream. Trying to stream those two positions is just horrific. Don't even try it. But to go off what you said, drafting a second tight end and a second quarterback, in anything besides Superflex tight end premium formats, for me, it's like buying the Ferrari for 16 weeks out of the year and then also buying a Honda Civic for the 1 week where the Ferrari's in the shop. You know what I mean? Like, if Sam Laporta is your Ferrari and you go and you take Dallas Goedert, it's like, what, you're going to drive the Honda Civic around for a week and just park it, use up one of your parking spots for it? It's like, it makes no sense. Especially when the whole point of fantasy football is to find the next Ferrari. That's what you're taking the wide receivers and running backs for. You're limiting your opportunities to do that by filling up one of your parking spots with the Civic. That's all I'm saying. That's why I like stashing players like Jonathan Brooks or even TJ Hawkinson. There's no speculation about whether he's going to be good. It's just a matter of time when he comes back. He'll be good. They're worth the bench spots that they take up to start the year, even if they aren't playing, because the potential power swing in your favor can be monumental if they pan out. And like you mentioned, a guy like Dallas Goedert, he just doesn't give you that upside, especially not running behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that. And like you mentioned those particular guys, like, you know, once those weeks get closer, like once Jonathan Brooks is like a week away from, you know, potentially getting a workhorse role. Like, let's say he got like 12 carries in like week 6, right?
Right.
And he broke 100 yards, right? Because he had a couple breakaway runs. He looks good. Like we kind of saw with Breece Hall last year, right? Where like he had limited opportunities but looked good. Like, do you know how much ammo that's going to be? Like whether you keep Jonathan Brooks or you trade him. Same thing with TJ Hawkinson. Similar type of situation where he's almost coming back and somebody is in desperate need of a tight end and you have an extra one. You know, it's this, and they're going to be in your IR spots, right? So like it's very different than having them on your bench. But when that time gets closer, you're going to be able to trade those guys pretty easily, or trade the guys that you already have on your team, and then hope that you can put those guys in your starting lineup.
Absolutely. Another tip that I like to find my trade targets by just seeing which players are being utilized heavily. And it kind of goes on to that point again, which players are getting the touches, that kind of thing. And bonus points if they've been underperforming despite that higher workload. Case in point, last year, Josh Jacobs started the season last year averaging 10 points a game on just under 20 opportunities a game, that's good workload, but not fantastic production. That production picked up over the next 9 weeks. After that, he finished inside the top 10 5 separate occasions after those initial disappointing 3 weeks. And the same thing goes the other way. If you remember 2 years ago, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, remember? 18.9 fantasy points per game in 2022. Even though he was only getting 11 touches a game over the first 4 games, we called him out as a sell. After 4 weeks of beating the odds, he turned into a pumpkin. He didn't have a fantasy finish inside the top 24 the rest of the season. So that being said, not every trade has to be a situation where you buy low or sell high. You know, last year Puka Nacua came out of nowhere with 2 huge games to start the year. His value skyrocketed right off the bat. If you were trying to trade for him, chances are you weren't getting him cheap. He had, 35 targets through 2 games, if I'm not mistaken. It was just ridiculous. You had to pay up. But and I'm not saying you have to overpay for the players you want either, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and get the player that looks like they're going to be good, and it can pay off later on. You need to make things as beneficial for your team as possible at the end of the day. You never know what the next week holds, and what you thought might be a player's ceiling in 1 week might just be another step up to that player realizing an even higher ceiling. That was the case for Puka. He caught 15 passes for 147 yards in week 2. A lot of people thought that was it, but then 2 weeks later, he put up a $163 and a touchdown. So he had his best performance 2 weeks after what looked like was going to be his best performance. And people worried about Cooper Kupp coming back. You know, he came back. Puka Nacua was still Puka Nacua, albeit it wasn't as consistent, but he still had that weekly upside that you were looking for. You don't always have to buy low or sell high. You can get the guys that you want if they're trending in the right direction. So you don't have to make everything a total fleece job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And we're going to, help guide you guys through this, on Wednesdays every week on this show. We'll be calling out certain players. Some players we might end up buying high. It's not always about buying low. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind.
Right.
Now, this is going to piggyback off of my last tip of you not getting points for guys on your bench. Improve your starting lineup. If you have solid starting players on your bench, combine that player on your bench with the player that you're trying to improve upon and do a 2-for-1 deal to make that starting slot better. For example, I have Zamir White on my bench. I have Christian Kirk in my starting lineup. You have decent running back depth. I would look to see who needs a running back in my league, and a team that needs running backs has Rashee Rice. They have T. Higgins. They have Amari Cooper. And you're like, all right, that looks like a solid upgrade to Christian Kirk, who's already in my lineup. The trade calculator might say, no, like, don't do that deal. But you do that deal, you just upgraded your starting lineup. You're scoring more points than you were the week before. That's what I'm constantly looking to do. I'm not worried about the bye week. I'm not worried about depth. I'm looking to win weeks. I continue to build depth through the waiver wire, through other types of trades. And then when things happen, you kind of adjust and you make moves.
Yeah.
What do you think about that strategy overall? Like, do you like to build? Do you like to continue to have depth, or do you like to just optimize your starting lineup? Because I think different people do this a little differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And there's value in depth. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's very important to have at least a little bit of depth. So if a player goes down, you have a solution, or at least a bridge to get you to where you get to your next solution, that kind of thing. But for me, I am 100% on board with this. I want my starting lineup to be the best players on my team. My depth at my bench can be whatever. It doesn't matter. Obviously, you want the depth that's going to help you win. But for me, the only players that are counting towards your weekly score are the ones in your starting lineup. Very rarely do I find myself ever on taking a deal where I'm getting more players in return for one of my players, because you only have so many starting spots in your lineup. I don't care if you're getting 3 very good players, you know what I mean? Unless they're all like beating everybody that's already in your starting lineup, they're going to go to your bench, and then they're just going to kind of be sitting there. So I'm always, to go off of your point, looking at my bench, seeing who hasn't been in my lineup recently because other players are doing really well. And you can really do this analysis 2 or 3 weeks into the season. You'll know who's going to end up on your bench the rest of the way, probably, as long as everybody stays healthy, and be like, okay, I can afford to part ways with this person. And then you could just go about addressing holes in your current roster. Because at the same time, players might look really good. They might move from your bench to your starting lineup, and you didn't expect them to be there, and vice versa. So I'm 100% on board with this. I'm always looking to upgrade my starting lineup. I don't think there's an issue with going and taking guys, even if they're, like you mentioned, they're good players. There's nothing wrong with taking them if they're not in your starting lineup, and going and get somebody that's going to be in your starting lineup. And then when you take the player out of your starting lineup, there's a chance that somebody else, as a result of that trade, is now sitting on your bench again, and you just repeat the process. And you just keep getting better.
I'm with you, man. I think we should start getting into some buys and sells. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm down with that. Absolutely. And I have one.
Who is your first guy who you're buying or selling this week? Before week 1. We're making moves already.
It's tough. It's tough because a lot of people, we've all drafted our teams. And I'd say everybody probably likes their first 8 or 9 picks of their draft. And then the rest of the picks are probably, okay, I could part ways with these people because they're more flyers, that kind of thing. But for me, I'm looking to buy Calvin Ridley today before he plays any snaps as a Titans wide receiver 1. I mean, I really like what Tennessee did to build around Will Levis this offseason. They brought in Brian Callahan, Bill Callahan, beefed up that offensive line. They added Tony Pollard. They added Tyler Boyd. He was drafted, Calvin Ridley, as a fringe wide receiver 3 this summer, which I think is crazy. He absolutely has the upside to beat that ADP. He had 134 targets in an offense where Evan Engram had 140 of his own. Christian Kirk was on pace for 100 plus before he got injured, and ETN had 67. So Calvin Ridley is no stranger to target competition. Even with DeAndre Hopkins, Tony Pollard, and Tyjae Spears, that's a step down in competition compared to what he was dealing with in Jacksonville. Levis likes to air it out. Ridley can make a killing if they can find a connection. This is a guy that can put up easy wide receiver 2 numbers, in my opinion. He's my wide receiver 26 right now in my final rankings, but his upside is top 20. And Vegas says this weekend could be a high-scoring game between the Jags and the Dolphins in week 1. 3rd highest game total at 49.5. There's a chance he's the first wide receiver on a bench, on teams' benches, around different leagues, depending on the size of the league. And it's hard to imagine a world where his price is any lower right now than it will be in a few weeks. So I think with what we see, the opportunity that Calvin Ridley could be stepping into, I expect him to be the wide receiver 1. DeAndre Hopkins is good, but I expect Calvin Ridley to be Will Levis' go-to guy in an improved offense with a decent matchup out of the bat. I think there's a real opportunity for Calvin Ridley's price to go way up. If he scores 20 points, I think in week 1, he's going to be definitely worth a lot more than he is right now. I think an expectation, if he hits 12 or 13 points, people can be like, okay, that's what we expected. That's what we drafted him at. It was that fringe wide receiver 3 numbers. But I think we're looking at more wide receiver 2 numbers as long as everybody stays healthy.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. I think that is a perfect guy to look at now. You know, it's whenever you're looking at guys who are on the fringe of, hey, should I start that guy or not? Honestly, like with someone like Calvin Ridley, whose opportunity can go way up, if he ends up having a big game, and then people will start to trust him more. He doesn't have to play the X receiver anymore. He's going to be a flanker for the Jaguars. Like you said, a high-scoring game against the Dolphins. This could be a situation where you're like going into week 2, you're like, yeah, I'm definitely starting Calvin Ridley, no doubt about it. So I think, where he was being drafted, like we all know he has, wide receiver 2 upside, maybe even high wide receiver 2 upside. So whenever you can get that kind of upside, and the floor is there too, man. So I think, this is a situation where this is going to be a high-scoring game, and I'm totally willing to put a couple pieces together, put a trade together for Calvin Ridley. I like it.
He's probably sitting at the top of people's benches. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Because that's what I found. People have been taking him, or at least I've been taking him. A lot of times he ends up as my wide receiver 4. And I don't need that many wide receivers in my lineup. I have my 2 starting wide receivers in the flex. I might have a running back or a wide receiver. He's ending up at the top of my bench every time. And like you mentioned at the top of the show, trading for bench players is way easier. So if you look around and Calvin Ridley's sitting on a bench somewhere, I'd definitely look to go get him.
I'm with you, man. All right. Now the season is here, it is time to win some money using Underdog Pick'ems. All you have to do is choose higher or lower to win up to 1,000 times your money. And right now, this is a limited time deal. Underdog is offering a free Travis Kelce pick for Thursday Night Football for the opener. If you get your entry in now, and you combine it with whatever picks you like for the entire weekend, I did a few. And some plays I like to combine with that Travis Kelce free pick. By the way, all he needs is 1 yard. But Isaiah Pacheco, I do like him to get over 14.5 receiving yards. Samaje Perine didn't have much time to get integrated just yet. So I think Pacheco will still be able to do his thing in the receiving game. Hollywood's missing, so I think Pacheco will do his thing. Rashee Rice, over 61.5 receiving yards. Jalen Hurts, over 32.5 pass attempts. This is going to be a more pass-first offense, and they're going to run more plays. So I do like that number. Devontae Smith, over 58.5 receiving yards. I like that as well. There are a lot more to choose from. But when you do download Underdog, make sure to use the code UPPERHAND to claim a deposit offer up to $1,000 and get your Pick'em special. All right, so there's a couple promos there. Make sure you use that code. You can use the code or the link in the description of this podcast episode. Download Underdog and win some money today. All right. The player who I wouldn't be surprised who pops off in week 1 and you're like, all right, I guess that buy window is closed, is JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's sitting in people's flexes right now, or he's sitting on people's benches. JSN was a screen merchant last year. It made no sense as to how he was used. JSN was second among all wide receivers last year in targets behind the line of scrimmage. Like, what are we doing? He only had 90 targets. 32 of them were behind the line of scrimmage. Okay, sure, you want to mix that in, of course, but that is not how that is not who. Sure, mix that in, but that is not who JSN is. He's a good route runner who can make plays vertically down the field, and that's how I think Ryan Grubb is going to use him. And in week 1, Patrick Surtain will be on DK Metcalf. We should fully expect a shadow situation there. JSN is going to see Jaquan McMillan, who's a good nickel corner, but he's way better in run support and as a blitzer than he is in coverage. The Broncos were in the middle of the pack last year when it came to allowing fantasy points to slot wide receivers. And I think in this new pass-first offense, and with the slot matchups coming up against the Patriots, the Dolphins, the Lions, we could be viewing JSN very, very differently in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic call. And I think the biggest thing for me, and you're onto this too, is just Ryan Grubb being there. It's going to be a complete change from the way he was used last season. He was, like you mentioned, so many targets behind the line of scrimmage. Did you watch the preseason game at all? The one series, I think it was in week 3. Who was catching passes? It was DK Metcalf and JSN. They were both just popping off. They looked fantastic. I think getting JSN involved more downfield across the intermediate part of the field, I think that's going to be huge for him. Like you said, I don't want him to be completely left out of the screen game right now, but it seems like there's a more concerted effort right now to get JSN involved down the field, get him the ball in space versus downfield versus in the backfield, where he has to go through 9 defenders. Now he only has to go through the secondary because he's catching the ball that deep. I think that's going to be a big difference for JSN. And like you mentioned, with that slate of matchups coming up, I think that he's in a really good spot to be one of those guys after 4 weeks. You talk about like first quarter risers. I think that JSN is absolutely going to be on that list. And I like the whole Seahawks offense in general, just because of this upgrade that they're getting in the passing game. So that's huge for me. I like that call.
Yeah, 100%, man. Okay, I got one more tip, and it's a simple one. sell lower end running backs to anyone who needs running back depth at this point in the season, okay? There are a handful of teams after every draft that wish they grabbed like at least one more startable running back. And you might have ended up with Devin Singletary or Gus Edwards. Like, these guys are probably on your bench this week, and you should be able to move them to a running back needy team. Okay, there's a lot of coach speak right now around Singletary. I would be packaging up Singletary along with all the tweets that show Brian Daboll calling him out, calling him an every down back, right? And he doesn't need to lead the field and all that. Package that up with the player in a position you're looking to improve your starting lineup, and send it to someone who needs a running back and improve one of your spots in your starting lineup. Easy. Yeah. Easy move.
Easy money. Especially Singletary, too. Because I just look at it. He's one of those guys. The coach speak is fantastic right now for pumping up his value. Because how good is this Giants offense going to be? If the Giants offense is moving, it's going to be Malik Nabers, in my opinion. I don't know how much, even a full-time role on an offense like New York's, I don't know how valuable that's going to be. There's not a whole lot of touchdown upside. I think they're going to be getting off the field. There's going to be a lot of 3-and-outs. There's not going to be a whole lot of sustained drives. And then if they're playing from behind, like Devin Singletary, are they going to be running the ball 15, 20 times a game? I don't even think that's going to be the case. So for me, I think that's a perfect sell candidate as well. But it's very good advice, very sound advice too. You just sell the lower-end running backs, especially if you're set at running back. Just go give other people the peace of mind. Let them have the peace of mind, quote unquote, if that's what they're looking for.
That's right. And that's going to do it for today's show. Tomorrow we'll be back with our quarterback and running back matchup upgrades and downgrades. We'll be calling out specific matchups to help you make your week 1 start decisions. Also, don't forget we're starting our brand new show, Upper Hand Kickoff, live on Instagram at 11 a.m. Eastern Time to help you make those last-minute decisions. Again, Upper Hand live on Instagram at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you guys tomorrow for another podcast episode. See you then. Bye-bye.